American soldier, found a diary in the ruins, and read aloud, "He misses his daughter too." The air itself tasted of ash and fear, a perpetual metallic tang that clung to the back of the throat, even miles from the front lines. Across the ravaged landscapes of Western Europe, a grim tapestry of destruction had been woven, thread by thread, with the lives of countless men. The year was late 1944, and the war, a monstrous entity that had consumed the world, was slowly grinding towards its bloody conclusion. Every breath was a gamble, every shadow a potential threat, and the concept of humanity felt like a distant, fragile whisper, almost forgotten amidst the ceaseless roar of artillery and the chilling crack of rifle fire. Yet even within this crucible of chaos and despair, within the very heart of the storm, there existed an unseen current, a subterranean river of compassion that defied the logic of conflict, bubbling to the surface in the most unexpected moments. This was a realm where the lines blurred, where the uniform became secondary to the shared pulse of a fragile existence. Private Thomas Miller, an American soldier whose youth had been prematurely aged by the relentless march of war, moved through the skeletal remains of what was once a bustling German town. His boots crunched on glass and plaster, each step a mournful echo in the pervasive silence that had descended after the last bombardment. His ordinary world had been a quiet farm in Iowa, filled with the scent of freshly tilled earth and the laughter of his younger sister. Now his reality was defined by rubble, the acrid smell of burnt timber, and the constant gnawing ache of homesickness. He was a cog in a vast, destructive machine, his purpose distilled to survival and the grim task of pushing forward. The war had stripped away much, replacing hope with a weary resignation, and the vibrant colors of life with a monochrome palette of gray and brown. Yet, deep within him, a flicker persisted, a memory of kindness, a yearning for something beyond the immediate, brutal present. He moved with the practiced caution of a veteran, his M1 Garand held ready, his eyes scanning for any sign of life or death. The building he entered had once been a home, perhaps even a bakery, judging by the faint, sweet ghost of yeast that still lingered in the dust-filled air. Now, it was a gaping maw of broken bricks and twisted metal, exposed to the indifferent sky. A single stubborn rosebush, somehow untouched by the inferno, bloomed defiantly in a corner of the collapsed garden, a splash of vibrant crimson against the desolation. Thomas paused, his gaze drawn to the incongruous beauty, a momentary reprieve from the ugliness. His mission was to clear the sector, to ensure no hidden threats remained. But his eyes, tired and burdened, kept drifting to the small intact details that whispered of lives lived before the bombs fell. A child's shoe, a broken teacup, a faded photograph trapped beneath a fallen beam. These were the ghosts of an ordinary world that mirrored his own, now shattered. It was amidst a pile of splintered wood and torn fabric, in what might have been a small study, that he found it, a leather-bound diary, remarkably preserved, its cover embossed with a faded, intricate design. It lay half-buried, as if discarded in a hurry, a silent testament to a life abruptly interrupted. This was the call to adventure, not a command from a superior officer, but a quiet, insistent tug from an inanimate object. His initial instinct was caution. It could be booby-trapped or simply meaningless. But something about its untouched presence, its stark contrast to the surrounding chaos, compelled him. He picked it up, feeling the worn leather against his gloved fingers, a tangible link to a past that was not his own. The binding was still firm, the pages crisp. A strange, almost forbidden curiosity stirred within him. This was the enemy's world, their secrets. Yet, as he carefully opened the diary, a different kind of curiosity took hold, one that transcended the uniform and the battlefield. He saw neat, flowing script, in a language he barely understood. His finger traced the unfamiliar words, a silent communion across the chasm of war. Then his eyes fell upon a date, a recent one, and a phrase, written in a larger, more emphatic hand that resonated with an immediate, profound familiarity. He painstakingly translated it, word by agonizing word, the meaning slowly unfurling in his mind. The words were not of hatred, or battle, or ideology. They were a lament, a deep, aching personal sorrow that pierced through the layers of his own battle-hardened defenses. A man, an enemy soldier, had written, "He misses his daughter too." In that moment, the world shifted. The ruins around him seemed to breathe, and the vast impersonal horror of the war momentarily shrank, replaced by the universal, undeniable echo of human grief. This was no longer just a diary, it was a bridge, an unexpected fragile connection across the abyss. The diary, a small, unassuming object, became a heavy anchor in Thomas's hand, pulling him not into the earth, but into an unknown depth of human experience. He had crossed an invisible threshold, from the purely tactical realm of warfare into a landscape of shared vulnerability. The revelation in the diary's opening pages had been a refusal of the call in its own way, a moment of internal resistance. His mind, trained for combat, urged him to dismiss it, to focus on the mission, to maintain the necessary emotional distance from the enemy. How could he allow himself to feel empathy for the very people he was fighting? This internal struggle was fierce, a battle between the hardened soldier and the lingering humanity within. The logical part of his brain warned against sentimentality, a dangerous weakness in this brutal world. Yet the words, so stark and simple, had resonated with a truth that transcended the uniform. He had his own family, his own sister, waiting for him back home. The thought of their separation, their fear, mirrored the unseen anguish of the diary's author. He found a secluded corner in the bombed-out building, a place where a fallen wall offered some semblance of shelter from the elements and prying eyes. The dust motes danced in the slivers of sunlight that pierced the shattered roof, illuminating the quiet act that was about to unfold. He began to read, slowly, carefully, his limited German dictionary, a constant companion. Each word was a step into a stranger's soul, a tentative exploration of a life that, despite the vast chasm of war, felt increasingly familiar. He discovered the author was a German officer named Klaus, a man of quiet reflections and profound inner turmoil. Klaus was not a monster, not a faceless enemy, but a father, a husband, a son. His entries spoke of the crushing weight of duty, the terrible choices forced upon him, and the gnawing guilt that accompanied every order given, every life taken. Thomas, reading these words, felt a profound and unsettling connection. This was his meeting with a mentor, not a physical person, but a voice from beyond the divide, offering a perspective he had never considered, a wisdom born of shared suffering. The diary, in its quiet power, was the unique tool that began to dismantle his preconceived notions, providing a new lens through which to view the conflict. The diary detailed Klaus's life before the war, a life filled with simple joys, evenings spent reading to his daughter, walks through a blooming garden, the warmth of his wife's hand in his, then the insidious creep of ideology, the inexorable pull of duty, the forced separation. Klaus's words painted a vivid picture of a man caught between his love for his family and the demands of a brutal regime. He wrote of the bitter cold of the Eastern Front, the camaraderie with his fellow soldiers, and the creeping despair as the war turned against them. He confessed to moments of profound moral questioning, to the silent scream of his conscience against the atrocities he witnessed, and sometimes was forced to participate in. Thomas felt a chill that had nothing to do with the drafty ruins. He recognized the universal soldier's burden, the loss of innocence, the constant fear, the desperate longing for an end to the madness. The diary was not just a record of events. It was a testament to the human spirit's struggle against dehumanization, a fragile beacon in the encroaching darkness. It forced Thomas to confront the uncomfortable truth that the enemy was not monolithic, not purely evil, but composed of individuals, each carrying their own burdens, their own loves, and their own profound losses. The weight of this realization pressed down on him, a heavy, disquieting truth. The discovery of Klaus's diary was more than a mere find. It was a seismic shift, and crossing the threshold that propelled Thomas from a world defined by stark enemy lines into a complex landscape of shared humanity. The initial act of reading had been a tentative step, but with each page, the commitment deepened, becoming an irreversible journey into understanding. He could not unread the words, could not unfeel the profound connection that had forged itself between him and the unknown German officer. The familiar framework of us versus them began to crumble, revealing the intricate, often tragic tapestry of individual lives caught in a global catastrophe. The stakes were no longer just about survival on the battlefield. They were about the survival of his own soul, his own capacity for empathy in a world that demanded its suppression. One entry in particular became a turning point, a revelation that shattered Thomas's remaining defenses. Klaus described a night on the Eastern Front, a brutal winter storm raging, when a young Russian soldier, barely more than a boy, stumbled into their trench, half frozen and disoriented. The immediate reaction of Klaus's comrades was to execute the enemy. But Klaus, haunted by the image of his own son, saw only a child. He defied orders, offering the boy a piece of his meager rations, sharing his own warmth, and then, under the cover of darkness, guiding him back towards the Russian lines, risking court-martial, even death. Klaus wrote of the boy's terrified, grateful eyes, a silent plea that echoed his own deepest fears. He had acted not as a soldier, but as a human being, driven by an instinctive, defiant compassion. This single act, detailed in the diary, illuminated a hidden truth. Even in the darkest corners of war, the light of human kindness could pierce through. This account profoundly challenged Thomas's perceptions. He had always believed in the clear-cut narrative of good versus evil, a necessary simplification for the brutal realities of combat. But Klaus's story revealed a nuanced, agonizing truth, that even those on the other side were capable of extraordinary acts of selflessness. It forced Thomas to confront a difficult choice, to cling to the simplistic hatred that fueled the war, or to embrace the uncomfortable complexity of shared humanity. The diary had become his moral compass, pointing towards a path less traveled, a path of empathy that was both dangerous and profoundly necessary. He began to see the faces of the enemy, not as a faceless horde, but as individuals, each with their own story, their own loved ones, their own silent battles. The war had not changed. The fighting continued, but Thomas's internal landscape had been irrevocably altered. He had crossed the threshold, stepping into a new world where compassion was not a weakness, but a defiant act of courage, a secret weapon against the dehumanizing forces of conflict. The weight of the diary in his hands now felt less like a burden and more like a sacred trust. The diary became Thomas's clandestine companion, a silent witness to his own internal tests, allies, and enemies. The greatest enemy was not always external. It was often the insidious doubt, the ingrained prejudice, the constant whispers of propaganda that sought to harden his heart. His allies were the universal truths he found within Klaus's words, the shared human experiences that transcended national borders. Each entry presented a new test, a moral dilemma that forced him to reconcile the brutal realities of his present with the profound insights he gleaned from the past. He continued to translate, his German improving with each page, pulling back the veil on Klaus's life, a life that mirrored his own in unexpected ways. One entry recounted Klaus's desperate search for medical supplies for a wounded comrade, a journey through enemy territory that mirrored Thomas's own harrowing experiences. Another described the stark beauty of a sunrise over a desolate battlefield, a moment of fleeting peace amidst unimaginable carnage, a sentiment Thomas himself had known. These parallels were a constant, unsettling reminder of their shared humanity. But the tests grew more severe. Klaus wrote of being ordered to participate in actions that violated his deepest moral code, moments where he had to choose between his own survival and the preservation of his conscience. He detailed the agonizing compromises, the justifications he made to himself, and the lingering scars these choices left upon his soul. Thomas felt a cold dread as he read, recognizing the terrifying possibility of such dilemmas in his own future. The diary forced him to confront the fragility of his own values, to question what he would do when faced with similar impossible choices. He found himself observing his fellow soldiers with a new, unsettling perspective. Were they all just cogs, or did they, too, carry hidden diaries of their own struggles, their own secret acts of kindness, or moments of profound regret? The lines between friend and foe, good and evil, became increasingly blurred, not in a way that diminished his resolve to fight for his cause, but in a way that deepened his understanding of the tragic complexity of war itself. The diary was a relentless test of his empathy, challenging him to look beyond the uniform, beyond the enemy lines, and to see the human being beneath. It was a lonely journey, this internal battle, for he could not share the contents of the diary with anyone. To do so would be to invite suspicion, perhaps even accusation. In the crucible of war, compassion for the enemy was a dangerous luxury, a potential betrayal. So, Thomas carried the burden of Klaus's story alone, the weight of it growing with each passing day, pushing him towards a confrontation, not just with the enemy outside, but with the moral landscape within himself. The tension built relentlessly, a quiet internal pressure cooker, threatening to erupt as he approached the deepest, most harrowing parts of Klaus's narrative. The diary's final pages were a descent into the inmost cave, leading Thomas towards the ordeal that Klaus had faced, and now, through his words, Thomas had to confront. The entries grew more desperate, the handwriting more frantic, reflecting the unraveling of Klaus's world as the war reached its brutal climax. He described the final desperate defense of his hometown, the very place where Thomas now stood amidst the ruins. Klaus wrote of the terror in the eyes of the civilians, the impossible task of protecting them, and the crushing realization that their cause was lost. He detailed the moment he saw his own home engulfed in flames, the screams of distant neighbors, and the profound, soul-shattering despair of witnessing everything he loved being destroyed. This was the central crisis, the ultimate fear, not just death, but the obliteration of one's entire world, one's identity, one's future. Then came the entry that spoke of the ultimate sacrifice, the moment of profound transformation. Amidst the chaos of retreat, Klaus encountered a group of children, separated from their parents, huddled in a bombed-out cellar, terrified and starving. His orders were clear: retreat, save himself. But the image of his own daughter, the very child he missed so dearly, flashed before his eyes. He made a choice, not as a soldier, but as a father, as a human being. He used his remaining rations, his last reserves of strength, to lead the children to a makeshift shelter, a hidden tunnel known only to locals, away from the path of the advancing forces. He ensured their safety, knowing that by doing so, he was sacrificing his own chance of escape, his own life. The diary ended abruptly there, a final poignant entry describing the children's small, trusting hands in his, and a silent prayer for their future. Thomas knew, with a chilling certainty, that Klaus had not survived. He had faced his ultimate fear, and in that moment of profound selflessness, found his redemption, his reward, seizing the sword. This revelation was a cathartic climax for Thomas. He closed the diary, tears blurring his vision, not for the enemy, but for the shared tragedy of humanity. Klaus's sacrifice resonated deeply, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, even in the face of absolute destruction. All the subplots of his own internal struggle, his questioning of the enemy, his battle with prejudice, converged in this single, powerful truth. The diary was not just a historical document, it was a profound lesson, an elixir of empathy. Thomas had not gained a material reward, but something far more meaningful, a deeper understanding of courage, not just in battle, but in the quiet, defiant acts of kindness. He had seen the enemy, not through the scope of his rifle, but through the lens of shared humanity. And in doing so, he had found a piece of himself that he feared had been lost forever. The silence of the ruins felt different now, no longer just empty, but filled with the echoes of a profound redemptive act. The immediate aftermath of finishing Klaus's diary left Thomas in a profound state of quiet contemplation. The cacophony of war, though still raging in the distance, felt muted, almost irrelevant, compared to the internal landscape that had been irrevocably altered. He carried the diary with him, not as a souvenir, but as a tangible embodiment of his transformation, a constant reminder of the road back that now lay before him. This journey was not merely physical, a retreat from the front lines, but a complex emotional and philosophical return to a world that he now saw through different eyes. The scars he carried were no longer just from the external wounds of war, but from the internal struggle, the shattering of his preconceived notions, and the painful, yet ultimately liberating process of seeing beyond the uniform. The denouement of his personal journey began to unfold as he continued his duties, clearing sectors, moving through the ravaged towns. But now, his gaze lingered on the small, forgotten details. A child's drawing on a crumbling wall, a half-burnt photograph of a family, a single wilting flower in a shard of pottery. These were no longer just markers of destruction. They were poignant reminders of the lives that had been lived here, the dreams that had been nurtured, the loves that had blossomed. He saw the faces of the German civilians, the elderly, the women, the children, not as the anonymous enemy population, but as individuals bearing the same burdens of loss and fear that his own people would carry if their homes were ravaged. The diary had given him a profound philosophical depth, highlighting the universal lessons learned from Klaus's sacrifice. That humanity, in its purest form, transcends the arbitrary divisions of conflict. Thomas found himself instinctively acting with a newfound gentleness, a quiet compassion that surprised even himself. When an elderly German woman, her face etched with grief, stumbled through the rubble, searching for remnants of her home, Thomas did not see an enemy. He saw a mother, a grandmother, a human being in distress. He offered her his canteen, a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes in the harsh silence of war. He helped her move a heavy beam, his actions driven not by orders but by an innate sense of empathy that Klaus's story had ignited. These were the lingering consequences of the diary, the subtle yet profound shifts in his character. He was still a soldier, still committed to his mission, but his heart had expanded, his understanding deepened. The war had not ended, the fighting continued, but Thomas was no longer the same man who had entered those ruins. He was fundamentally changed, carrying the weight of Klaus's story and the quiet, persistent hope that such acts of compassion, however small, could somehow eventually mend the fractured world. The road back was long, uncertain, and filled with new, unforeseen challenges, for the struggle to maintain empathy in a world that demanded hatred was an ongoing battle, a testament to the persistence of struggle. The war eventually ended, not with a sudden, triumphant flourish, but with a weary sigh, a slow, arduous unwinding of a global nightmare. Thomas returned home to Iowa, to the familiar scent of tilled earth and the loving embrace of his family. The quiet farm life he had yearned for was there, waiting for him, but he was not the same man who had left it. This was his resurrection, not from death, but from the spiritual desolation of war, a final, symbolic test of his transformation. The tranquility of home was a stark contrast to the chaos he had left behind, and for a time the silence was almost deafening, filled with the echoes of distant battles and the haunting whispers of Klaus's diary. He carried the diary, still, carefully wrapped in a canvas cloth, a sacred relic of his journey. It was his return with the elixir, not a magic potion, but a profound understanding, a gift of empathy forged in the crucible of conflict. He found solace in the rhythm of the seasons, the predictable cycle of planting and harvest. Yet the lessons learned from Klaus's story continued to resonate, shaping his perspective, guiding his actions. He often thought of Klaus, of his daughter, of the children he had saved. The diary had taught him that even amidst the darkest atrocities, the human spirit possessed an astonishing capacity for kindness, for self-sacrifice, for love that transcended all boundaries. This was the transcendent conclusion, the lasting impression he carried, and the message he felt compelled to share, subtly, through his own life. He became a man known for his quiet wisdom, his deep compassion, his unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of people, even those who seemed to be on opposing sides. He never spoke much of the war, not of the battles or the heroics, but sometimes, in hushed tones to his own children and grandchildren, he would speak of a diary, of a man on the other side, and of a shared humanity that bound them all. The diary itself remained a private testament, a physical embodiment of the truth that kindness doesn't end wars, but it survives them. It became a symbol of hope, a tangible reminder that even in the most inhumane conditions, humanity can reassert itself, a powerful force against the tide of hatred. Thomas's life became a quiet legacy, a living embodiment of the diary's message. He did not preach, but he lived, demonstrating through his actions that empathy was not a weakness, but the ultimate strength, a beacon that could guide even the most lost souls. His return was not just a physical homecoming, but a spiritual one, bringing a gift that had the power to transform others, to remind them that beneath the uniforms and the flags, there beat a universal heart, capable of both immense destruction and boundless compassion. The echoes of humanity, first heard in the ruins of a German town, continued to resonate through his life, a timeless melody of hope and forgiveness, a testament to the enduring power of connection in a fractured world. The brutal machinery of war, designed to dehumanize and divide, often strips away the superficial layers of identity, revealing the raw, universal core of human vulnerability. In the desolate landscapes of conflict, where survival becomes the paramount instinct, the commonality of suffering can, paradoxically, forge unexpected bonds. Imagine the biting cold of a European winter, the gnawing hunger, the pervasive exhaustion that cares little for the uniform worn. When soldiers from opposing sides find themselves equally exposed to the elements, perhaps huddled in a bombed-out structure during a relentless blizzard, the shared ordeal can momentarily eclipse the imposed animosity. They become, in that fragile space, simply human beings striving against a common, non-partisan foe, nature itself. Consequently, the most basic human needs, for warmth, for sustenance, for a moment of respite from the ceaseless terror, can become powerful, albeit fleeting, bridges. Consider the quiet exchange of a meager ration, a shared sip of water, or even a silent nod of understanding across the chasm of language and ideology. These are not acts of surrender, but rather involuntary acknowledgments of mutual fragility, tiny anchors in a tempest of destruction. Such moments underscore the profound psychological truth that beneath the rhetoric of hatred and the imperative of combat, an innate capacity for compassion often stubbornly persists, a flickering ember refusing to be extinguished by the gale of conflict. Furthermore, the ethical demands of certain professions frequently transcend the artificial boundaries of war. Medical personnel, for instance, often find their oaths of healing supersede the directives of military engagement. Picture an Allied medic stumbling upon a desperately wounded Axis soldier, or a German nurse tending to an injured prisoner of war. The sight of profound suffering, the urgent need for intervention, can bypass the soldier's ingrained enmity, activating a more fundamental human response. The Red Cross, a universal symbol of aid, becomes a flag of truce in the microcosm of a field hospital or a makeshift aid station, where the only enemy is disease or injury, and the only allegiance is to life itself. These individual moments, though often unrecorded in official histories, challenge the monolithic narrative of absolute enmity. They reveal the intricate, sometimes contradictory nature of the human spirit under duress. The very act of extending kindness to an other can be a profound act of moral affirmation, a quiet rebellion against the dehumanizing forces at play. It safeguards a part of the soul, preventing the complete erosion of empathy that prolonged exposure to brutality can inflict. Such gestures, however small, serve as vital bulwarks against the moral injury that can scar individuals long after the physical wounds have healed. Beyond the immediate relief they offer, these acts carry a ripple effect, however subtle. They plant a seed of doubt in the mind, a tiny crack in the edifice of hate. How can one maintain an absolute conviction of the enemy's inherent evil when confronted with an unexpected act of grace from their ranks? This cognitive dissonance, this challenge to deeply held beliefs, is itself a crucial component of healing and eventual reconciliation. Think of the returning soldier, forever altered, who carries not only the scars of battle, but also the indelible memory of a moment when humanity shone through the darkest clouds. A poignant example of this phenomenon involves a German Luftwaffe pilot, Franz Stiegler, and an American bomber crew in December 1943. After their B-17 bomber, Ye Olde Pub, was crippled by German anti-aircraft fire and fighter attacks, its crew severely wounded, Stiegler, a seasoned ace, had the American plane in his sights. Yet observing the damage, the exposed crew, and the pilot's visible injuries, a profound human instinct took hold. Rather than delivering the final fatal blow, Stiegler chose to escort the limping bomber out of German airspace, saluting the American pilot before turning away. He risked court-martial, even execution, for this act of profound compassion, seeing not an enemy, but fellow airmen in distress. Ultimately, these extraordinary acts of empathy are not about condoning the horrors of war or absolving its perpetrators. Instead, they serve as powerful testaments to the enduring resilience of the human spirit, small lanterns ignited in a vast, encroaching darkness. They remind us that even when pushed to the brink, the capacity for compassion, for recognizing the shared humanity in another, remains a fundamental, unbreakable thread in the tapestry of our existence. Yet, the tapestry of war, while often depicted in stark blacks and whites, frequently reveals threads of unexpected nuance, particularly when the immediate threat recedes, or when the sheer exhaustion of conflict settles over the landscape. One might ponder the subtle yet profound instances where empathy manifests not through direct aid, but through an intentional act of restraint, a deliberate decision to withhold the final, devastating blow. Consider the exhausted patrol, encountering a lone, disoriented enemy soldier, clearly no longer a threat, perhaps too young or too old for the brutal front lines. In such fleeting moments, the ingrained imperative to destroy can give way to a recognition of shared vulnerability, prompting a quiet bypass rather than an engagement. This choice, born of a deeper, unspoken understanding, underscores a different facet of compassion. The decision not to inflict further harm when the opportunity arises, a silent acknowledgement of a common, weary humanity. Moreover, the presence of non-combatants frequently acted as an unexpected catalyst for these moments of cross-line empathy. Imagine a rural family living in a contested zone who might offer shelter or a simple meal to soldiers from either side, not out of political allegiance, but out of a primal human impulse to succor those in need. For the soldiers receiving such kindness, it often served as a jarring reminder of the world beyond the trenches, a stark contrast to the dehumanizing propaganda they were fed. This interaction could, in turn, soften their perception of the enemy, whom these civilians also likely encountered, fostering a subtle, often subconscious, shift in perspective. The shared vulnerability of non-combatants, caught between warring factions, frequently elicited a protective instinct from soldiers, blurring the rigid lines of animosity. A particularly compelling example unfolds during the Battle of the Bulge, a notoriously brutal winter offensive. Amidst the chaos and freezing conditions, an American medical unit became separated and found themselves in German-held territory, desperately low on supplies. A German officer, stumbling upon their predicament, did not immediately capture them. Instead, recognizing their non-combatant status and the dire medical emergency, he permitted them to treat their wounded, even offering a temporary localized truce for the duration of the blizzard. This exceptional act of battlefield diplomacy, driven by a shared respect for the sanctity of life and the ethical demands of medical care, transcends mere tactical calculation. It highlights how professional codes of conduct, when adhered to by individuals, can create temporary oases of humanity, even in the most intense combat zones. Consequently, these instances of unsolicited empathy, whether expressed through deliberate non-aggression or direct aid, profoundly impact the individual soldier's psyche. The experience of receiving or witnessing such an act can create a cognitive dissonance, challenging the carefully constructed narrative of the enemy as purely evil or fundamentally different. It forces an internal reckoning, a quiet reevaluation of the conflict's moral landscape. This psychological reorientation, though often unspoken and unacknowledged in the heat of battle, forms a crucial, albeit subtle, counter-narrative to the pervasive dehumanization of war. It reminds the individual that the other side is composed of individuals, each with their own capacity for kindness and suffering, mirroring their own inherent humanity. Such moments, therefore, are not merely anecdotes. They are profound testaments to the enduring and often subversive power of human connection, demonstrating that even in the most adversarial circumstances, the deepest currents of compassion can still flow. Beyond the individual's solitary journey of internal reckoning, there existed a fascinating dynamic where the shared vulnerabilities inherent to combat, often stripped away by the relentless machinery of conflict, could resurface through unexpected channels. Consider, for instance, the profound, albeit fleeting impact of a common artistic expression. Imagine the quiet hum of a familiar melody drifting across no man's land, perhaps from a harmonica played by a German soldier on a lonely night watch. An American private, huddled in his own trench, might suddenly recognize the tune, a folk song, a classical air, a popular melody from before the war. This shared sonic landscape, transcending language and uniform, could momentarily dissolve the imposed enmity, replacing it with a wistful recognition of a common cultural heritage, a shared human experience that war strove so desperately to erase. Such moments were not grand gestures, but subtle, powerful disruptions to the dehumanizing narrative. Furthermore, the very act of maintaining personal effects, often carried at great risk, served as a poignant testament to the enduring civilian identity beneath the soldier's facade. Picture a soldier from one side discovering a wallet from the fallen enemy, not to plunder, but to identify. Inside, alongside official papers, might be a faded photograph of a smiling family, a child's drawing, or a carefully pressed flower. These fragments of a life lived, ordinary yet precious, offered an undeniable glimpse into the humanity of the perceived foe. The sight of a child's innocent face, so universally appealing, could instantly override the propaganda, forcing a direct confrontation with the reality that the enemy was also a parent, a sibling, a son, bound by the same fundamental ties of love and family. This personal encounter with another's private world often left an indelible mark, sowing seeds of empathy in the most barren emotional terrain. Consequently, these micro-interactions, whether through shared music or discovered mementos, acted as powerful, albeit subversive, forces against the military's imperative to foster absolute otherness. The deliberate construction of an enemy as monstrous or fundamentally different relies heavily on preventing such intimate personal connections. Yet human nature, with its inherent capacity for recognition and identification, frequently found ways to bypass these barriers. These moments were not about fraternization in the traditional sense, but about an involuntary, deeply personal recognition of shared humanity, a brief but potent acknowledgement that the person on the other side of the trench was, in essence, just like oneself, caught in the same brutal storm. Building on this, however, one must also acknowledge the immense psychological burden these moments placed upon individuals. To witness or participate in an act of humanity across enemy lines was to carry a secret, a truth that often contradicted the official narrative and could not be openly shared. This internal conflict, the dissonance between duty and conscience, could persist long after the armistice, shaping a veteran's worldview in profound and complex ways. The memory of such an encounter might become a silent guiding star, influencing future interactions and fostering a deeper, more nuanced understanding of conflict itself. Another crucial layer is how these individual acts of empathy, however small, contributed to the broader, often unacknowledged undercurrents of human connection that paved the way for eventual reconciliation. While no single act of kindness could halt the war machine, the cumulative effect of countless such instances, witnessed and experienced by individuals on both sides, created a subtle, collective memory of shared humanity. This shared memory, perhaps buried deep beneath layers of trauma and propaganda, became a vital resource during the post-war efforts to rebuild relationships and foster a lasting peace. It demonstrated that even when ideologies clashed violently, the fundamental human capacity for understanding and compassion remained intact, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Now consider how this applies when you reflect on the narratives of post-conflict societies, where the seeds of peace are often found not in grand political gestures, but in the small personal bridges built during the darkest hours. Even amidst the relentless grinding gears of armed conflict, where the very essence of humanity seems under siege, a profound truth frequently emerges. Empathy, in its most fundamental form, often serves as an internal bulwark against total moral erosion. It is not always manifested through overt gestures of aid or dramatic rescues. Rather, it often resides in the quiet refusal to fully surrender one's capacity for understanding, a silent defiance against the relentless pressure to dehumanize the adversary. This internal resistance, though unseen, is a crucial act of self-preservation, safeguarding the soul from the ultimate casualty of war, the loss of one's own compassion. Moreover, the sheer scale of devastation, universally inflicted and collectively endured, often fosters an unspoken, empathetic bond between those caught in the maelstrom. Witnessing the wholesale destruction of towns, the displacement of countless families, or the widespread suffering of civilian populations, regardless of their national banner, can evoke a primordial grief that transcends allegiance. The shared sorrow for a world irrevocably altered, for innocent lives tragically cut short, becomes an invisible thread, weaving together the experiences of both victor and vanquished into a tapestry of collective loss. This recognition of mutual tragedy, while not halting the fighting, can temper the absolute conviction of righteous hatred, introducing a disquieting yet necessary nuance. Furthermore, the psychological imperative to maintain one's moral equilibrium, even when compelled to participate in brutal acts, often gives rise to subtle forms of empathy. Soldiers, regardless of side, frequently grapple with the ethical dilemmas inherent in combat, wrestling with directives that clash with their innate sense of right and wrong. The act of mentally acknowledging the adversary's humanity, even if only in a fleeting thought, can serve as a vital anchor, preventing a complete descent into moral abyss. It is a quiet heroism, this steadfast adherence to an internal moral compass, which allows individuals to navigate the moral quagmire of war without losing their fundamental identity as compassionate beings. Consider, too, the unexpected catalysts for understanding that arise from shared, overwhelming existential threats, distinct from direct combat scenarios. When a widespread natural disaster, perhaps a devastating flood, an unforeseen earthquake, or a pervasive epidemic, sweeps through a war-torn region, its indiscriminate fury often compels a temporary, unspoken cessation of hostilities. In such moments, the common enemy is not a nation or an ideology, but an indifferent force of nature, or a merciless disease. Adversaries might find themselves inadvertently sharing resources, offering assistance to any victim, or even coordinating efforts against the greater non-human threat. Such desperate circumstances can momentarily strip away the uniforms, revealing individuals united by the primal instinct for survival and the shared fragility of life itself. Ultimately, the enduring impact of these internal battles and subtle acts of empathy is profound, often blossoming long after the final shots are fired. These seeds of understanding, planted in the barren soil of conflict, contribute significantly to the arduous journey of post-war reconciliation. They form an unspoken bedrock for rebuilding trust, demonstrating that even when ideologies clash violently, the fundamental human capacity for connection and compassion remains intact. This quiet testament to the resilience of the human spirit shapes the collective memory, providing a foundation upon which future generations can construct a more peaceful world, reminding them that even in the deepest shadows, the light of shared humanity can persistently flicker. Within the stark, confined geographies of prisoner-of-war camps, where the physical battle ceased, but a profound psychological struggle endured, empathy often found a unique, often subversive, expression. Here, the immediate threat of combat was replaced by the grinding monotony of deprivation and the constant pressure of confinement. It was in these crucible environments that the constructed image of the enemy could slowly erode, revealing the shared vulnerabilities of individuals stripped of their uniform's protective anonymity. Now, consider the intricate dynamic that unfolded when captors and captured were forced into prolonged, proximate interaction, a scenario distinct from fleeting battlefield encounters. A subtle yet potent form of compassion emerged from the mundane routines of daily existence within these camps. It was not always a grand, heroic gesture, but rather a quiet, consistent acknowledgement of shared humanity. Imagine a guard, weary from his own burdens and the moral weight of his position, who might deliberately overlook a minor infraction, or perhaps facilitate a clandestine message to a family, understanding the deep human yearning for connection. These small acts, often performed at personal risk to the captor, were profound affirmations of dignity for the interned, offering momentary reprieves from the dehumanizing system designed to break their spirit. Such instances were not about fraternization, but about the recognition that suffering, regardless of uniform, evokes a primal human response. Furthermore, within the diverse populations of the camps themselves, where prisoners from various allied nations might be confined alongside individuals from Axis powers, an unexpected solidarity could sometimes blossom. Despite language barriers and ingrained nationalistic tensions, shared experiences of hunger, illness, and the collective longing for home often forged an unspoken understanding. Picture a moment where a British airman, suffering from a fever, receives a smuggled extra blanket from a German sailor, or where a French resistance fighter shares a precious, hoarded piece of bread with an American infantryman. These were acts of mutual aid, driven not by alliance, but by the raw, unadulterated recognition of another's immediate plight. Such interprisoner empathy underscored the enduring power of shared adversity to transcend pre-existing animosities. Consequently, these instances of quiet benevolence, whether from captor to captive or between prisoners of differing origins, played a crucial role in preventing the complete psychological collapse of many internees. They provided vital emotional anchors, reaffirming that despite the brutal realities of war, The capacity for human kindness persisted. This preservation of empathy, both given and received, served as an internal act of resistance against the very ideology of total war, which sought to strip individuals of their moral compass and reduce the other to an abstract, deserving target. It demonstrated that even in environments meticulously designed for control and psychological erosion, the human spirit could stubbornly carve out spaces for connection and dignity. Another crucial layer involves the collective psychological impact these experiences had on those who returned home. Veterans, having witnessed or participated in such acts of cross-cultural compassion in captivity, often carried a more nuanced and complex understanding of the enemy than their compatriots who had not shared similar experiences. This deeper insight could profoundly shape their post-war perspectives, making them powerful, albeit often silent, advocates for reconciliation and understanding in their communities. Now, consider how such intimate, first-hand knowledge, gleaned from the crucible of shared confinement, contributes to a more resilient and empathetic society in the long term, reminding us that even in the darkest corners of human conflict, the seeds of profound connection can be sown, blossoming into unexpected bridges of understanding. Beyond the immediate visceral interactions on the battlefield or within the confines of captivity, empathy sometimes manifested in more abstract yet no less profound ways. It occasionally emerged from a shared recognition of the sheer, crushing responsibility borne by those in positions of command, regardless of their uniform. This unique facet of compassion sprang not from shared physical suffering, but from a mutual understanding of the agonizing moral calculus inherent in leadership during wartime. The burden of sending men into harm's way, of making decisions with catastrophic consequences, often forged an unspoken solidarity among officers from opposing forces, a recognition of a parallel, tormenting duty. Consider, for instance, the rare instances of parley or the debriefings of high-ranking prisoners. In such moments, the veneer of enemy status could thin, revealing individuals grappling with identical moral dilemmas. A German colonel, captured after a strategic retreat, might find himself discussing with an American brigadier the impossible choices faced when civilian populations are caught in the crossfire, or the bitter necessity of sacrificing units to save others. This was not about agreement on ideology, but a shared somber acknowledgement of the immense, solitary weight of command, a moral crucible that few outside their ranks could ever truly comprehend. The empathy here was born from a recognition of shared psychological scars, the indelible marks left by decisions that haunt a leader long after the conflict ends. Consequently, this distinct form of compassion offered a glimpse into the complexities of human agency within the rigid structure of war. It challenged the simplistic notion that commanders were detached, cold strategists, revealing instead individuals wrestling with profound ethical quandaries. Such encounters, however fleeting, underscored a universal truth that the agony of leadership, the relentless pressure to make life-and-death decisions, transcends national allegiance. It highlighted how, even at the highest levels of military hierarchy, a fundamental human capacity for understanding the other's burden could pierce through the fog of war, fostering a respect rooted in shared anguish rather than shared ideals. Furthermore, a strikingly different, yet equally potent current of empathy flowed through the ranks in response to the plight of sentient beings caught indiscriminately in the conflict's wake, animals. While human suffering dominated the landscape, the silent agony of horses, dogs, cats, and livestock often evoked a profound, almost instinctive compassion from soldiers on all sides. These creatures, utterly innocent and voiceless, became poignant symbols of the war's indiscriminate cruelty, frequently eliciting a tenderness that combat otherwise suppressed. Imagine a lone American infantryman pausing his advance through a ruined village to offer a piece of his meager ration to a starving, shell-shocked dog, its ribs stark against its matted fur. Or picture a German soldier risking observation to help untangle a wounded horse from barbed wire, its plaintive whinny cutting through the silence of a desolate field. These acts, often performed in secret or observed only by chance, were not about strategic advantage or ideological alignment. They were raw, unfiltered expressions of an elemental human connection to life itself, a recognition of shared vulnerability that transcended the immediate conflict. Crucially, this empathy for animals underscored a deeper primal layer of humanity that refused to be extinguished. It demonstrated that even when humans were locked in a brutal, internecine struggle, the capacity for tenderness and protection towards the utterly innocent and helpless remained fiercely intact. Such moments offered a stark contrast to the violence, a quiet testament to the enduring presence of grace in the face of widespread destruction. Now, consider how these diverse expressions of empathy, from the shared burdens of command to the quiet care for a suffering animal, collectively paint a more nuanced portrait of humanity's resilience, reminding us that compassion, in its myriad forms, stubbornly persists, even when all seems lost. Even within the crucible of combat, where animosity was the prevailing currency, an unexpected commonality sometimes emerged through the most unlikely of mediums: shared, albeit dark, humor. Picture the absurdity of a situation, perhaps a botched maneuver or a sudden, ridiculous mishap on the battlefield, witnessed simultaneously by opposing forces. A moment of shared guttural laughter, born of pure disbelief or the sheer irony of their predicament, could momentarily shatter the rigid boundaries of enmity. This wasn't about friendship, but a primal human response to the ludicrous, a fleeting recognition that even in hell, the capacity for mirth, however grim, persisted across the divide. Such instances, rare and unrecorded, offered a brief, vital release from the crushing psychological weight of war, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit's need for levity, even in the direst circumstances. Furthermore, a different kind of bridge could be constructed through the solemn, non-combat tasks that occasionally necessitated a temporary truce. Consider the grim duty of retrieving the fallen after a particularly brutal engagement. When both sides agreed to a brief cessation of hostilities for this purpose, the act of respectfully gathering bodies, regardless of uniform, often fostered a profound, if unspoken, mutual understanding. Witnessing the sorrow of an enemy soldier carefully tending to a fallen comrade, perhaps identifying him through a worn photograph, evoked a universal empathy for shared loss. The sanctity of death, the dignity of the deceased, momentarily transcended national allegiances, transforming adversaries into fellow mourners in the face of indiscriminate tragedy. Another crucial layer involves the psychological impact of witnessing profound personal bravery from the opposing side. Imagine an act of extraordinary courage, a lone enemy soldier risking his life to save a wounded comrade under heavy fire, or a defiant stand against overwhelming odds. Observing such valor, even in an adversary, could ignite a grudging respect, a recognition of shared human qualities like tenacity and self-sacrifice. This was not about admiration for their cause, but an involuntary acknowledgement of their individual fortitude, a testament to the indomitable spirit that could manifest in any human being, regardless of the flag they fought under. Such moments complicated the narrative of absolute evil, forcing a re-evaluation of the enemy as merely a human being capable of immense courage. Now consider how children, through their sheer innocence and vulnerability, often served as inadvertent, yet powerful, catalysts for empathy. Unlike adults, children carried no ideological baggage, no ingrained hatred. Their simple requests, their frightened eyes, or their unself-conscious presence in a war-torn landscape could bypass a soldier's hardened defenses. Imagine a German soldier, hardened by years of fighting, encountering a small, lost American child, perhaps separated from a displaced family. The child's innocent query, "Mama," or a simple plea for warmth, could trigger a primal protective instinct, overriding years of indoctrination. The uniform became irrelevant. Only the universal need to protect the helpless remained, a potent reminder of the humanity that war sought to suppress. Consequently, these varied expressions of empathy, from shared laughter and solemn truces to respect for bravery and the protection of children, collectively underscore a vital truth about human nature. They reveal that even when societies are meticulously engineered for conflict and individuals are trained to view the other as an abstract enemy, the deep-seated capacity for connection and compassion often finds a way to surface. These moments, though often hidden from official records, formed a powerful counter-narrative to the pervasive dehumanization, reminding those who experienced them that the lines drawn on maps and the colors of uniforms were ultimately superficial compared to the profound, shared pulse of humanity. Such instances did not end the war, but they preserved a fundamental aspect of the human soul, ensuring that complete moral annihilation remained an impossibility. Beyond the immediate clangor of battle or the stark confines of incarceration, a different, more insidious form of interaction sometimes bred an unexpected empathy, the nuanced dynamic between interrogator and interrogee. This prolonged, psychologically intense engagement, often occurring in secluded, sterile environments, compelled a unique kind of human proximity. Here, the interrogator, tasked with extracting information, was forced to delve deeply into the subject's psyche, not merely as an enemy combatant, but as an individual with a personal history, motivations, and vulnerabilities. The process demanded a profound, if clinical, understanding of the other's life, their family, their fears, and their loyalties. Consequently, through the meticulous study of gestures, inflections, and the subtle nuances of human response, the interrogator could inadvertently gain a startling insight into the interrogee's inner world. The enemy ceased to be an abstract entity. Instead, he became a complex individual, perhaps a father worried about his children, a son loyal to his family, or a man simply caught in the vast, unforgiving machinery of war. This enforced intimacy, while primarily strategic, frequently triggered a flicker of recognition, a shared understanding of the universal human condition that transcended the adversarial roles. The interrogator, in seeking to exploit weaknesses, often uncovered the very threads of humanity that bound them both, creating a peculiar, unsettling empathy that often went unspoken. Furthermore, a distinct, often unacknowledged vein of camaraderie could emerge from the shared exasperation with the vast, labyrinthine bureaucracies that governed the war effort on all sides. Whether Allied or Axis, soldiers frequently found themselves entangled in endless paperwork, nonsensical regulations, and the maddening inefficiency of logistics. The universal frustration with red tape, the illogical directives from distant command, or the inexplicable delays in vital supplies, often created a silent, unspoken bond of mutual annoyance. This common enemy, the impersonal, often absurd administrative machine, transcended national allegiances, fostering an almost conspiratorial understanding among those who simply sought to execute their duties amidst such overwhelming systemic obstacles. It was an empathy born not of shared suffering, but of shared bureaucratic torment. Moreover, the sheer, indifferent grandeur of the natural world frequently provided a profound, unarticulated source of human connection that defied the conflict. Consider the breathtaking spectacle of an aurora borealis dancing across the night sky over a frozen battlefield, or the silent, persistent flow of a mighty river bisecting contested territories. These moments of immense natural beauty, or the stoic indifference of ancient landscapes, were witnessed by soldiers from all factions. The shared experience of observing such majesty, or the humbling realization of humanity's insignificance against the backdrop of geological time, could momentarily strip away the layers of hatred and ideological division. It evoked a primal awe, a sense of shared wonder that connected individuals not as enemies, but as sentient beings sharing a single fragile planet. Thus, these encounters with the sublime, or the mundane frustrations of military life, offered fleeting glimpses into a shared existence, distinct from the brutality of combat. They were quiet affirmations that despite the imposed divisions, a deeper, underlying humanity persisted. The interrogator might never embrace his subject, nor would soldiers from opposing sides share a meal over bureaucratic complaints. Yet, the subtle shifts in perspective, the momentary softening of the heart, or the silent nod of shared understanding, served as vital counterpoints to the pervasive dehumanization of war. Such instances subtly, yet powerfully, contributed to the preservation of individual moral integrity, ensuring that even when forced into adversarial roles, the capacity for recognizing and acknowledging the shared human experience remained stubbornly intact. This was not about ending the war, but about preserving the very essence of what it meant to be human within its destructive embrace. The intricate tapestry of human experience, even when frayed by the relentless aggression of war, frequently revealed an astonishing resilience, especially in the realm of aesthetic appreciation. Imagine a moment when a soldier, navigating the shattered remnants of a European city, stumbled upon a grand piano, miraculously intact amidst the debris, or a vibrant mural on a crumbling wall. The sight of such enduring beauty, a testament to human creativity and spirit, could momentarily transcend the immediate imperatives of conflict. A lone American private, perhaps, might find himself captivated by a meticulously crafted wooden toy left behind in a deserted workshop. The intricate details, the evident care in its creation, spoke not of an enemy, but of a shared human desire to craft, to imagine, to bring joy. This silent communion with an object of art, regardless of its origin, forged an unexpected, fleeting connection, a recognition of a universal language spoken through form and color, a language impervious to the rhetoric of hatred. Beyond such static encounters, a profound, if often unspoken, respect sometimes germinated between adversaries through the acknowledgement of exceptional skill or unwavering professionalism. Consider the meticulous precision of a sniper's shot, or the audacious daring of a fighter pilot's maneuver, observed by an opposing force. This wasn't about personal affection, but a deep, almost primal appreciation for mastery of craft, a recognition of dedication and expertise that transcended the uniform. An Allied engineer, examining a particularly ingenious defensive fortification, might feel a grudging admiration for the ingenuity of his German counterpart. Such moments, devoid of sentimentality, highlighted a shared understanding of competence and the rigorous demands of their respective roles, creating a peculiar, professional empathy that existed independently of the conflict's moral dimensions. Ultimately, these echoes from the past offer us not a naive blueprint for an end to all conflict, but a profound and enduring hope. They reaffirm that even when the forces of division seem insurmountable, the light of human connection can pierce through the deepest shadows. Kindness doesn't end wars, but as these stories unequivocally show, it survives them, leaving an indelible mark on the soul, preserving our collective humanity and serving as a timeless beacon for a more compassionate